We're going to talk about different poetic forms today. There's so many forms that a poem can be in, and we're just going to barely scratch the surface of a few of them, but it will give you an idea of how different poetic forms work. Different ones work in different ways, and there's all different kinds, so let's talk about a few of them. Okay, let's talk about fixed forms, which is what I'm going to be talking about in this video, versus open form. Fixed forms are already established designs for poems that people choose to use over and over for many reasons. Why would you want to follow an established form instead of creating your own? Well, some of them have been used over and over because they're just beautiful forms of language. Sometimes a poet will like the fact that you will immediately recognize something as a sonnet or as an ode or something, so they have that recognition. Sometimes it's just an intellectual exercise to see if you can make it work. Some of them you'll read in the book definitely look like the poet was just trying to make it work. So they were kind of playing around with language and having fun with it and making it fit into a certain form. Sometimes you'll be accepted by the establishment and by poetry lovers. If they can recognize that you do some of the traditional forms, sometimes you can get some respect or quicker recognition than poets who try more experimental forms. They may take longer to get the recognition they need. So we'll talk about some of these poetic forms. Now, open forms create their own ordering principles. They don't have a set rhyme scheme or a set rhythm or meter. They're usually, the poet is using internal principles of their own. They may create their own, or they may just want to make sure that things sound a certain way, but they don't follow already established principles. So free verse and blank verse don't follow. Now, blank verse is often iambic pentameter, but it doesn't rhyme. Free verse doesn't worry about being any particular meter or whether it rhymes or not. It might not. Okay, so forms are organized. Any set form is organized by putting lines into groups called stanzas. So you will have a certain number of lines put together. They'll be called a stanza. Stanzas will have their own rhythm and system of end rhymes internal to that stanza that will then relate to the larger one and to the stanzas around it. So if different poets use that same system of organizing their stanzas and establishing their end rhymes, then they are using the same form, as you will see these different as we go. So rhyme schemes are an important part of any form. Most of them have set rhyme schemes, or there might be a couple of rhyme schemes they can use, but rhyme schemes refer to how end rhymes work, not internal rhyme or anything like that, but how end rhymes work. So you can see that this very familiar little poem, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, has a set end rhyme scheme. It's an AABBAA end rhyme scheme. And this is how rhyme schemes are always talked about, by letters where they show the repetition of the rhyme. So star and R rhyme, high and sky rhyme, star and R rhyme again. So it's an AABBAA rhyme scheme. Stanza patterns are often referred to by the number of lines in the stanza. So a couplet, as it sounds like a couple, has 2 lines. A tercet has 3 lines. A quatrain has 4 lines. An octave has 8 lines. So if you talk about stanza patterns, for instance, we say a Shakespearean sonnet has 3 quatrains, so 3 groups of 4 followed by a couplet, 1 group of 2. So you'll have 3 groups of 4 followed by the 2. 3 quatrains followed by a couplet, and that's how you would refer to a Shakespearean sonnet. So speaking of the sonnet, there are 2 types, the Petrarchan sonnet, which is the Italian sonnet, and the Shakespearean sonnet, which is the English sonnet. Shakespeare did not create the English sonnet, he just made it famous. As with so many things about Shakespeare, he doesn't create them, he just makes them famous. Petrarchan sonnet, the Italian sonnet, was created by a man named Petrarch. In a Petrarchan sonnet, there are 8 lines, which is called an octave, and then 6 lines called a sestet. So you see 14 lines. Same thing with a Shakespearean sonnet. You have 3 quatrains and then a couplet. So they're both 14-line poems, but they're a little different in the way they're arranged. So you don't just have one big 14-line group all together. You have them broken up for their rhyme scheme or their rhythm. Now, sonnets are generally in iambic pentameter. And in a sonnet, there's always a place where there's some kind of a turning point, where it goes from talking about one thing to something else, or changes the tone or something. And that changing point is called a volta. So in any kind of a sonnet, particularly you see it in a Shakespearean sonnet, you will have that volta where there's a change in tone or a change in topic, or just kind of a reversal of something. So that's called a volta. This is a villanelle. Have 19 lines of any length, 5 tercets and 1 quatrain. There will be line repetition, and then there is a rhyme scheme. So notice there's an ABA rhyme scheme until you get to that 1 quatrain at the end where you have the ABBA. Now, here's the interesting thing about a villanelle. Notice that I have it in bold here where it says, "Do not go gentle into that good night" as the first line. Notice that is also the 6th line. Do not go gentle into that good night. Then it's also at the end of the 4th stanza. Do not go gentle into that good night. And again in the quatrain at the end. So you can see how that in a villanelle, lines are repeated. You have repeated rhyme schemes, and you have repeated lines. So, and then notice the last line of the first tercet, rage, rage against the dying of the light. Notice then that comes in at the end of the 3rd, and then again at the end of the 5th, and then again at the end. So you see how there's actual line repetition. I particularly do love this poem. It was written when his father was dying, and I just think it's a beautiful poem. But notice how that repetition. So can you imagine trying to create a work of art that has to have this rhyme scheme, has to have its lines in this number, in this order, and then repeat and make sense of it? That's a real intellectual puzzle. You have the sestina. This one has a very demanding fixed form. It has 6 6-line stanzas. I've only given you the first 3 here of this one. And then a 3-line conclusion, which is called an envoy at the end. But here's what's particularly demanding. At the end of each of the first 6 lines, in those first 6 stanzas, those words have to be repeated at the end of the lines of each stanza. So you see how you have day at the beginning, it's the last word of the first line. In the second stanza, day is the last word of the second line, and in the third stanza, day is the last line of the third line. Then you have night. You can see how I've italicized it in each stanza. Way, I've underlined it in each stanza. Light, I tried to make it bigger. May is in red, and delight's in kind of a orangish color. But you see how the writer of a sestina has to repeat the ends of the lines. Isn't that would be difficult, to make sure that you end that you're having something new to say about whatever it is, but that they're ending with the same words. And then all of those words, those 6 words, must be in the envoy, which is only 3 lines. So you have to work them in. So very demanding fixed form, one that poets like to play with these forms, and they don't always use them perfectly. Sometimes they play with them a little bit, but they love to play with words. If you like to play with words, you can see how this would be a real mental challenge to write this many lines and still have each 6 end with the same 6 words. I'm not a poet, not something I'd be up for, but it does sound pretty interesting. You have the epigram, which is just a short little pointed poem. It's often witty or satirical or paradoxical, and it doesn't really have a prescribed pattern except that it does have to be short and it does have to rhyme. So here's one by Paul Dunbar. There is a heaven forever, day by day. The upward longing of my soul tells me so. There is a hell, I'm quite as sure, for pray, if there were not, where would my neighbors go? You see the wit here, the little funny, witty comment that he's making on his neighbors here. So this is an epigram. Now, most of you have probably heard a limerick. They're always light and humorous. They're not really satirical like an epigram or something. They're, well, I'd say they can be satirical, but they're always light and fluffy. They're not meant to be harsh. Now, limericks are known for often being obscene. For some reason, it's a form that people like to write dirty rhymes in. So because of that, many of them are anonymous. Here's one of my favorites. There was an old man with a beard who said, "It is just as I feared. 2 owls and a hen, 4 larks and a wren have all built their nests in my beard." So a limerick is 5 lines long with an A, B, B, A pattern. And they're always just going to be in some way kind of silly or funny, light, humorous. The haiku is something that teachers love to assign students to write these. I don't know if you ever had to write a haiku when you were in a high school lit class or something, but it's a Japanese form. It only should have 17 syllables. It should have 3 unrhymed lines of 5, 7, and 5, and should create a picture. So this one's called After Basho. Tentatively you slip on stage this evening, pallid famous moon. So tentatively you is 5 syllables. Slip on stage this evening. Slip on stage this evening. I'm only making 6 out there. Pallid famous moon is 5 again. So somehow I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly. But that is the way that haikus are written, and they're just a really popular way to have students write poetry because they are short and they don't have to rhyme. You can see it feels Japanese. It's very minimalist. An elegy is a serious meditative poem, often commemorating someone who's dead. Sometimes they'll commemorate something like a battle, but usually commemorating someone who's dead. There used to be a set pattern for elegies, but it no longer has a set pattern. But it often has this kind of a feel. This is by Walt Whitman, where he's talking about the captain of a ship in probably in the Civil War, because that's when Walt Whitman was writing. "Oh, Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack. The prize we sought is won. The port is near. The bells I hear. The people all exulting. While follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But oh, heart, heart, heart are the bleeding drops of red." And of course, this is only a very small part, but the captain is dead. The captain's been killed in the battle. And elegies often use this, what we call apostrophe, where they are addressing someone who is not there or something that is not animate. So he's addressing a captain who is already dead and talking about him, and that would make it an elegy because it's commemorating someone who's dead. I'm sorry, went too far. Let's go back. Well, I guess we can't go back. So I skipped over the ode. You can look at the ode. An ode is a particular type that is usually a serious lyrical poem of very formal, very high-minded, and usually has some kind of high emotion to it. You can look at the ode in your book. Okay, then we have the parody, which is a humorous imitation of another poem. You see here the famous poem by Robert Frost, The Road Less Traveled. And you see on this other side, all of a sudden I've forgotten the name of this poem, but something about a lover not taken or something like that, because it's commemorating, it's imitating The Road Not Taken. This one I think was called The Lover Not Taken. If you read there, you can see that one is directly parodying the other, trying to make it sound very similar, like in the second line of the second stanza. "Having perhaps the better claim" is what the original one said. In the parody it says "his smile, but the other, Jack, had a claim." one ends in where, the other one ends in where. So anyway, you can just see that people will take a very famous poem, make a funny parody of it, and make a funny imitation, and that's a parody, just as it would be of a movie or a song. And finally, we have the picture poem. Now, there are many, many other types of poems, but these are just some big categories of poetry. Um, if you're using fixed forms. So the picture poem is where the words have just been arranged in such a way that they form a picture of what it is they're talking about. And these can be kind of fun. They make them in Everything Under the Sun, poets do, and they can be a lot of fun. So those are some of the fixed forms of poetry.